Welcome to our 12th session about the rural community food system. I have, since our last meeting, which I think was last Tuesday, I have continued to ponder the question that each of you has repeatedly asked, which is, what do we do next? And I recall when I presented this to all of you, the comment was, "Oh, that's nice, but let's get back to the real problem." So, and at this point, I think I have said before that we can't solve this problem. We can develop an understanding of aspects of it, but only the stakeholders could solve and implement this problem. And it would be different for every rural community to some extent. Which is why if I or anyone else produces some presentable subsection of this model, I would expect the results to be pretty much the same as when I presented this to the rest of you. It's like, okay, there's an ownership problem in terms of I developed a model and I tried to sell it to you, and I should know better, okay? Because I preach about not selling endlessly. So with the understanding that the best that we could possibly hope to do is deepen our understanding, what is it that we don't understand? And part of what I don't understand is, where did my first 6 loops go? Why am I at I07R on this model? Okay, comments?
Do you remember what your first 7 loops were?
Well, I thought that this was actually the first loop, but now it's labeled as number 7. Local sustainable food system.
Well, maybe it needs to be made number 1 again.
Well, I'm in other words, they all go 7, 8, 9. I mean, they're very much in order. Where did 1 through 6 go? I don't think we have any elves working on the model, so.
Okay, that may be me, because remember I made a relevant factors map, and I've got some loops in my map that you don't have in the introduction map. So relevant factors, I put land in.
Oh.
I've got land use in.
Okay.
I think that's an important thing with this system. It's a zero-sum game with land.
Yes. Well, I would agree that it's relevant.
When you look at land use, it's like 60% of land is already owned by a handful of corporate and financial interests, and most of farmland is being leased to farm operators.
Right. Right.
And that trend is accelerating, with small farms being bought out systematically. So it brings me back to what are the drivers of this system? Because all of what it does is logical when you look at what are the driving factors for this system, which is why I suggested we look at the systems value system and see what is the paradigm level idea, you know, that has turned the food system into what it is today. And just to expand on this for a moment, it sounded like a fantastic idea 30, 40 years ago, because you have industrial scale of production. You know, you have machineries that develop that are enormously productive. You have shelf life of products. You know, the products last. They can be revitalized by taking them out of the freezer or adding water to mixes, and you have you reconstitute products, transportability, commoditization, automation, all of these things. Basically, the industrialization of agriculture seemed to be like the next leg of the industrial revolution.
Yes.
Then at some point in time, nature came into the way, and we realized that we have interfered with a natural system that is complex beyond what we understood it to be.
Yes.
I mean, I remember the first restaurant that I opened at Disneyland, Pizza World, was we used sauces, for example, that were based on powder. You know, the entire production system was done in ways that required very little fresh product input. You know, nothing live in there, and so. I mean, we could serve 1,000 people per hour in this place. It was phenomenal. But then when you look back at it, the nutritional value of this food and where this food came from and how it was being shipped into the restaurant, today you would say is a disaster. But at the time, it sounded like a good idea because it was based on this industrialization model, if that makes sense.
It sure does. Just a quick comment. I like some of the video, etc., that you've been sending out, Klaus. And I'm working with a group of people trying to bring together community health, which I think could be the same as agricultural health. And some of that is the new idea, or one of the ideas is to create what does it mean to have a system learning kind of evolution of a community where you look at how it is engaged. And then what Klaus was saying is, what are the system values that are driving that perception of health for the community? And certain insurance companies and some government programs now are looking at rewarding entities that create more points of engagement. And so in that idea, then the more points of engagement with an awareness of a certain value system creates an ongoing, evolving system that is learning and adapting and moving forward on its own, rather than being a static condition. And which is, I from what I got, that is how the soils have worked so efficiently in the past, and how maybe some of our health worked more efficiently in the past, by having pasta that were sauce that was made out of real product rather than powder. But anyway, I'm just trying to draw an analogy there to that systems learning value.
Yeah, I mean, I was, after I retired, I mean, I had like no idea about any of this stuff, obviously. And it wasn't until I retired and started digging into the food system per se. First of all, understanding it as a system. I had no idea what systems thinking was. And I was giving a keynote address to the California Consultant School, food consultants. And so I sort of summarized everything that I saw. I'll copy it into the link in a moment. everything I was seeing at the time was just wrong. You know, you saw health impacts like diabetes and glyphosate in mother's breast milk. I mean, you saw all these crazy things that came out of the way that we were handling food, and really basically shocked myself. And so you're going through even probably my transition path from being in a position to design systems and products within the food business, and then converting that into being shocked about what a mess it is, and then trying to find ways to escape from it. Every food service professional has to go through that same transition period, you know?
Right.
I mean, so how can you help people to I mean, my favorite thing, it is what it is. How can you move through this so you understand how we got there and then where we need to move to?
And that was part of the idea of reframing maybe healthy communities, is by, injecting some values into the system, but also looking for ways to create more points of engagement where that perhaps could reach some transformational tipping points, as you said you had to go through. And if you map that out, then maybe people who want to do that sort of thing can see where the best lever point to instill a catalyst into the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think the system knows where it wants to go. All the conversations that I'm in, that is circling wider and wider. I mean, I'm in a conversation. I started with Citizen Climate Lobby, a group that focuses on oceans and on what is happening in your seafood and in that life. And it's just stunning when you look at the trend lines in the natural world. So what we don't know is how do you incent this transition path and help it along. And in my mind, it's completely consciousness based, because the solutions are all out there. I mean, everything is understood. We know exactly how this needs to progress, but we haven't reached the tipping point. And you ask how can you get there in a constructive and helpful way.
And that requires each individual then seeing them, having the opportunity to look at a larger view of how they're operating within the system themselves, to create that consciousness of ongoing thing. And that I think is the power of what Gene has here, because it is an overall view, but then how do you frame that so it's accessible to the individual who just wants to turn in and get another donut?
You caught me there for a moment, Klaus. You said the system knows where it wants to go, but we've been looking at this for a while, and the phrase is, what do we do next? There's a little bit of a gulf, at least a gap in there.
Well, I agree with Klaus in that the system itself knows where it wants to go based upon the current set of influences which are moving it in a direction. Okay, there are individuals amongst all of those relationships who have other ideas about better directions for it to take. Though presently the existing relationships are overwhelming the alternative relationships, and it's currently continuing to go in the same direction it's been going in, with slight alterations here and there. The link to the movie that Klaus sent out about the need to grow, I actually went and bought it and watched it twice. Marvelous piece of work. And, the guy has a really good idea about a closed loop system that actually produces natural fertilizer, grows good food, produces electricity, and other people were so afraid of it. I'm convinced that somebody burned it down on him. But he rebuilt it. So I mean, he's continuing. It's a marvelous idea. But it, you know, the public awareness piece that I brought into focus here is the key piece in terms of public awareness, understanding what understanding the negative aspects of what's currently happening from a participant's perspective, other than from Big Ag's perspective, and the alternatives that are possible from a cost-effective perspective. One of the other videos, it was the same video, I think. There are 30 years worth of demonstrated results that you can produce an equal yield without fertilizer and without pesticides, and regenerate the land at the same time. Though there's an investment required in some people, he talks about if he was simply interested in figuring out how to make a lot of money, fertilizer is a great thing, because you sell it to farmers and they put it on their crop, and they get an increased yield initially, but then the next year, because of what they've done to the soil, they have to use more, and then the next year they have to use even more, and then they need to find a new field. And then Klaus, you must be familiar with Montgomery's work and his Growing a Revolution.
Right. In fact, that's my
your Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, the book is marvelous in terms of him touring the world and seeing where numerous people are in fact doing test cases and beginning to do it, regenerative farming on an industrial scale. And you don't have to buy the book if you just go to YouTube and look up what's his first name? Something Montgomery. Montgomery. Hold on. Montgomery soil. Oh, I'm in the wrong place.
As you're looking for that, I just really like those yellow marks you got there: public awareness and systems value. And in the feedback, or the fellow there riding around in his four-wheeler putting up fence.
David Montgomery. Sorry.
Yeah, I just posted a link in the chat, which is to a whole bunch of his videos. Go ahead, continue, Bob.
Well, just the video that Klaus sent that shows the fellow riding around in his four-wheeler, and they would change the grazing patterns of the cows by putting up fences and taking them down quickly. His line in there saying, I tried to prove him wrong for 5 years before I changed my value system.
Yeah.
That story, I think, is priceless in creating a tipping point rather than trying to pound it down somebody's throat that this way is a better way to live. Mm-hmm. So some of those examples of stories like that fella said, I finally went after my wife gave me so much hell for naught. It was easier to go listen to what he had to say. And then he resisted the idea for 5 years. And so public awareness and knowledge and systems value become the underlying way to maybe create a systems learning and be aware that there's these feedback loops that are resistant to you. And I think that's right there within your yellows highlights. I mean, you can see that all right there.
I created a map on public awareness like I was requested to, which it's knowledge and systems awareness. Cool, there it is. All right, and then you need to show the narrative box if you can, because this one.
Oh, you want to show this?
Map narrative box, yeah, I want to show that type of thing. So I broke it up into different levels, and I don't think you need any, for the existing system, I don't think you need to go beyond social based. I mean, it'd be good if you had community health and ecological health and systems values, but I don't think it's necessary to the existing system. If you want to have values based, though, I think you need to further develop it.
Yeah, say that one more time, Brian.
The existing system does not require you to have anything to do with community health, ecological, systems value, or anything else. And I'm talking about the factory system we have right now. If we want to go to a more systems value-based systems approach, then these other levels need to be added in.
Yeah, you need to disrupt that, because otherwise they're just in a static, stochastic form. Yeah.
And now I mean, going a little bit deeper here, public awareness is so manipulated. You know, has everybody seen The Great Hack? That movie that explains how this whole data breach happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. I mean, it's just stunning to see how dependent a general population really is on the integrity of the information systems that they are exposed to. So. And then that, of course, is again driven by the systems value system, because those people who make decisions on how to inform the public and what to inform them about are guided by their values and what they think is right and wrong. And so, I would say public awareness, absolutely, but it still comes back to the information and media systems, you know, that are reflecting deeper values. So the food industry controls about 60% of the global food markets. In the United States is like 80-90% of what you get on the shelf is controlled by, you know, very few corporations. There are like 4 slaughterhouses left in all of the United States. They've taken out the entire infrastructure for processing cattle on a local and regional basis. So there has to be a shift that really starts in, we need to think different, you know, about the way we're interacting with the natural systems. And for example, I mean, I posted that earlier in the conversation. When you look at something like the Impossible Burger or lab-grown meats, you know, already going out into the markets with a product that has not been tested. There are GMO products in the yeast culture that has never been in the human food supply chain. Don't know what impact that will have long term, but they're out there. But the feedstock for these plant-based protein extracts is not aligned with regenerative farming. I mean, if they had gone out and with an understanding that the farmer needs to use cover crops and pulses, so we need to draw our protein from products that link up with the need of the farmer to regenerate his soil, that would have been awesome. But that never came into their line of thinking, you know, because they're unaware. I mean, most of the food service professionals are still unaware of what they're doing, and how what they're doing is causing so much damage to the overall ecology.
Our larger systems map, the introduction and the relevant factors map, both have a number of stagnating balancing loops, which are serving to keep the existing, to keep the system we want from flourishing.
Right.
The ones Gene came up with. I think those are important. They're not in this one because I just concentrated on the public awareness, but they are going to be operating here too.
Yeah, and I mean the systems value system, the paradigm level assumptions that have gone into the food system were done with good intentions. I mean, these were we are able to develop high volume food systems that take care of a lot of people's needs and so on, and we can do it and make lots of money in the process. It was just done in a vacuum. The awareness, the understanding of a living system, we are engaging a living system, just wasn't there. It just wasn't part of the curriculum. So how to change that at a macro structure, really, so that companies get the sense of we have to shift direction here and then start figuring out how can we do this and maintain our business model, or just adapt our business model to a new reality instead of breaking it. So that's sort of where I'm thinking.
Well, but businesses typically don't change their business model until they have to, do they?
Well, or until there is an economic advantage for doing so.
Right. Well, until they're driven to do it.
Yeah.
Or unless you're like Amazon and your business model is to be a disruptor of whatever system you see out there. And I would say that what you have up here in that picture, it in the same way, if you dug down into community health, if no one is thinking of their community health as a system learning system, and no one is thinking of their health and other things in this kind of picture.
Sorry, I got an alarm going off. It's the
well, anyway, the big picture that you have here, no one are talking about in this big picture system awareness other than probably us. So that then, by just empowering public awareness that there is a system that they're living within, creates a need for them to start defining what their system's value system is.
What I mean is you're going to have to find people who are interested in community health and collaborate with them. And I think they will recognize in most cases the viability of what we're talking about. But you're going to have greater collaboration than just the 7 of us.
Right. So it's bringing the concepts we're talking about, which I think could be a tipping point to creating value awareness. Because like I think Klaus said, or you said, Brian, that people are just not even aware that there is a problem.
well, okay.
I don't think you need to have.
They're not aware that there is a problem, and they're also adverse to having someone tell them that there is a problem. Because you're essentially going to somebody and saying, the way that you have been feeding your family your entire life is wrong, and you need to change. I mean, it's back to the selling as opposed to establishing an approach that enables people to buy because it's attractive. The thing that I said about, or the what the Heath brothers said in Moments about you need to take a clear insight compressed in time and enable the audience to discover it for themselves, which is why, you know, why I said that putting this together and presenting it to you was a mistake, okay, on my part, simply because I violated my own understanding, I guess. That, in other words, as we collectively developed this, there were some aha moments on practically everyone's part, simply because of what emerged from the set of interactions. It was the discovery, the aha moments, okay? And so I guess the question that I continually wrestle with is, how do I take the understanding that we have developed to this point and fashion aha moments for other people without insulting their intelligence? And I don't know the answer to that. And, you know, I mean, it's marvelous that Brian has created so many varying and differing perspectives of all of these relationships, which are the basis for some more aha moments, but you can't take them and present them to normal people. Sorry, the fact that you're here means you're abnormal.
Well, I have one more thing that there's an article out there, and I could try to send it to you, but it's an example of nurses trying to coach people with diabetes and high blood pressure. And the example was that the nurse is always staying within their formal parameters of how she should talk, which I think of as our graph right here, is our formal parameters of thinking how the system is. But the example is, the woman she was talking to that has high blood pressure, she would say, well, my husband has high blood pressure and this is how he does it and this is how I do it. So that's an example of her trying to contextualize the formal idea that the nurse was bringing forward. And so it was always a dance where the nurse was looking past, would not go past her formal way of discussing blood pressure or glucose or whatever. And the patient was trying to reflect back in a contextual story. And so that was a divide in that example.
Like this, doing this.
You know, it seems to me that what we're talking about and how we're trying to talk about is the way that 50 or 75 years ago, somebody wrote science fiction, because people could read it, but they could put it aside and say, oh yeah, but that's just that science fiction guy. Well, now civilization has gotten to a place where so many issues are so interconnected that the literate public is being forced to read something and they can't put it aside as science fiction. You have to read this. You have to deal with this.
And it's got to be framed into their own story then too, contextualized, right?
Well, and at the same time, never mind, go ahead. I'm about to rant, so just
One of the things
let me not rant.
coming back to is the group, Gene, that you introduced us to in the map. Rural Opportunities Initiative, was it? The one that was going into the low-income rural communities. I put it somewhere too, and I can't remember where I put it. It's somewhere in this map.
Somewhere in this map, what were you looking for?
We're looking for that map that you did from that you gave us, showing about social damage. People had gone through so many. I can't remember what the term is. Tragedies or something else that affected their lives. And this was, people would have a number of these, and it would really affect how they were. In rural communities, it was called rural opportunity something.
Oh, okay. All right. I remember. All right.
Exactly. Okay. And the thing that struck me is that they were talking about all these problems these people were having, but it really didn't seem to have any connection with the rural economy. I mean, I know that basically it was a matter of that the rural economy had failed them, but I just couldn't help thinking about, okay, these people are suffering, adverse childhood experiences. That's the word, ACE, yep. Okay? And it's just struck me, these people, especially in this country, and this is probably a large part of why Trump is president, because we've ignored this part of the economy, that if we were to focus on these and figure out a way of making their economy sustainable from what we are saying, that might go a long way into actually, getting two eagles with one arrow, as Chinese say. It just seems to me that we have to get down to this level of not only healing our land, but healing our communities as well.
Well, how inconvenient to have to deal with more than one silo of problems.
Okay.
System thinker. Let's stick to one system here.
It is one system.
No, I'm making a joke.
That's my prejudice.
As Pogo said, we have met the enemy and he is us.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it is a conundrum. The community is dependent on the larger system. We did a trip through the United States. My wife and I, we bought an RV and we went from California to Florida to Maine and back across to the West Coast. And it was stunning to see so many communities which are so in such horrible shape, across the country. Have no community bondage, no community spirit that's identifiable, and all you see, is McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Burger King, and I mean just one row of fast food joints, and a Walmart somewhere in the region. And that's really all they know. And so, and then you have, smaller communities like Greenville and Asheville, and where I live in Bend. I mean, they're wonderful places where everything really works. You have farmers markets in Santa Fe, for example, a phenomenal little community. So you have all these examples of what it could be, but the majority is not. And so, so to think about how do you bring enough energy into these communities that have none. I mean, they have no cohesiveness. Is a real conundrum, and so the volume, I mean, the farmers markets and people who are interested in buying direct, farm direct, and so on. That's like 2% of the food business. It makes a lot of noise, but I mean, it's nothing. So there are some players emerging, like Lidl and Aldi and Trader Joe's and so on, who are Whole Foods, who are more integrated into an organic system. But it takes just a whole lot more. Kroger controls something like 50% of the U.S. grocery market with all the chains that they own. So the I mean, it is an amazing challenge, you know, to unwind something that has been built up over the last 40 years.
Let me give another systems insight that I've gotten from working with you guys, and it's driving my thinking also. And in some ways, it's in opposition to what I just said before. And that is, one of the people that I'm very interested in is Jeffrey West and his book Scale. And sorry, the phone's ringing, but okay. So basically, one of the insights I got from working on this is that it's my belief that urbanization has driven the American agricultural system to being factory farm. Because of urbanization separating from the rural communities, it created a need for lower cost and better supply chains, and that resulted in our natural and our factory farm system, which was then sent out to the world as the Green Revolution with all the unintended consequences that involve. But the other thing that it means to me, though, is one of the points that Jeffrey West makes is that cities are one of the best organic forms of systems out there, and that they have a positive scaling up of many aspects, many negative ones, but also many positive ones. But it struck me that because of the separation from agriculture, our abilities to supply food to those urban centers is going to a sublinear scaling. And that it's becoming more and more difficult, which is why we keep on depending upon these factory farms. And that we need to find a way to turn that around. But that's going to be very difficult because most of the rural communities that we would have to go to make these changes are themselves sublinear and in terms of scale, and are either being colonized or harvested for their resources, or whatever term you want to use. And that is a very difficult problem to overcome.
Yes.
You said they're sub what?
Sublinear. That they're scaling at a decreasing rate. The slope is going down in many aspects. Because they just don't have, now I just read an article that said there's a brain gain in rural communities now, which sounds really interesting. I don't quite understand that. But for a long time, we saw the Rust Belt being decimated because of brain drain and resources and other things going on. And the same thing is true of our agricultural communities too, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Bend. It's about 100,000 people. It's the third fastest growing community in the U.S. Because it is just phenomenal how the community has built itself and how organic it really is.
So why is it growing?
It's blessed with a ski resort that's close by. And so you have a lot of tourism, which then attracts, great restaurants, which then attracts, the Whole Foods and the Trader Joe's and all these groups. So you have a quality of life here that is just very high, and with, combined with an outdoor environment that attracts, young people who like to go out biking and hiking and all fishing and all that.
Like the savory system that Gene showed us one time.
The what?
The savory system, the one from, I think it was the Netherlands, with the sheep, and they had an ecology between the restaurants and the farmers. You gave it to us a long time ago.
Well, your memory is better than mine.
I spend at least 2 year vacations with my family in Bend, because that's the only place my boys will meet us anymore.
No, it's a cool place. But there are many other examples, like Santa Fe is just so charming, in Greenland and Asheville, and so Greenville, Asheville. So there are many examples, but there are more examples of where it doesn't work, and where the entire market is swirling around a Walmart store for their supplies. So
I sent the two links on our chat, but I think the worldview of everybody or most people I've met in Bend is much different than the worldview of the community I live in.
yeah,
And I think that in the links I sent, the professional or the systems builder needs to be able to move beyond the formalization to help contextualize the worldview of whatever community you're in. And that, I think, is the challenge we have here, is looking at how to, and I don't know if it can be done beyond small interactions of conversations sometimes, at least to get to a tipping point, or to be able to at least recognize the worldview culture of different communities, rural and city-like, so that you know the lever points to change this awareness efficiently.
yeah. But at the end of the day, somehow something has to convince a Walmart and a Kroger and an Albertson to change their sourcing practices, and a McDonald's and a Burger King, that this burger patty that they're putting into the market that is untested and unverified and can't be sold in Europe because it violates the great no harm clause that they're using. So to convince these groups that their own survival also depends on getting the natural systems back together and preventing this complete catastrophe that is unfolding in our environment. For example, I'm just in a big discussion with Citizen Climate Lobby because their carbon bill excludes a fee on fertilizer, because in their mind they don't want to irritate the industrial farming industry, so they exempted the fertilizer industry from a carbon fee. And so we have put together, I have a meeting with the board in a couple of days, and to explain that the synthetic fertilizer, is the starting point of destroying the soil. And if you destroy the soil, you destroy the organic matter in there, which prevents the food supply for insects and worms, which takes away the food supply for birds and small mammals. And so it collapses the entire ecosystem. So it's just astounding, how there is still such a lack of awareness in how all of these things are linked together.
Right, and it's pretty priceless that someone like you, they may not, since they're not even aware, sometimes it's just bringing it to the table that you may not have resistance if you can frame it in a way that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
Which sounds like you're doing. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Ignorance is bliss. I've been living it.
Yeah. And the challenge is to simplify the message. It took me quite a while to bring down the idea of why the synthetic fertilizer has to be pulled out of the market, and certainly the carbon fee needs to be applied to it, double it, if anything. But to frame that story into this is root cause for species extinction that we're experiencing right now. To make this simple link of how nutrients deprive higher forms of life of their food supply, and how this is all linked together. So to move that into one sentence, those things take so much thinking time.
And I work with one person that, or actually a group, who's trying to frame that in, what does your kitchen look like? Meaning, well, here's a metaphor of how are you processing your food? And just an example of a simple image anyway.
But,
I-
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
I think one of the biggest barrier right now still boils down to the cost and the ability of people to really access this kind of products that we are talking about. And given this challenge, as we all know, all these big incumbents like the Walmarts, I think in order to convince them is to provide them the value proposition in terms of how do we address accessibility to this kind of products that we are endorsing, so that majority of their target markets would be able to access it. And given the cost of production right now, which is relatively higher than the alternatives, I think that's posing one of our biggest challenge here.
But cost to the individual and cost to the system are all value statements. And I mean, that's the tragedy of the commons. You think that the cost is only related to the individual, unless Walmart and the individuals can see that there's a value base to the whole system.
That is a good point. However, when you talk to the grassroots here, and when you go to the different communities that we are talking about, when they talk about cost, that is their immediate cost, that, the amount of food that they could put into their mouth is far more important to them than probably the other value proposition that we are talking about here.
Right, but then Walmart should be big enough to realize that the cost goes beyond just that. And so it becomes the whole system taking a new frame of view of what cost is, rather than picking on the lowest common denominator who can only survive if it's available to them at a certain cost.
Bob, where do you buy your tomatoes?
I get my tomatoes from my sister-in-law farm, and probably from the local grocery store. From organic, but actually from Walmart sometimes too. I mean, all of them. I don't practice what I preach sometimes.
Don't feel alone.
Oh, totally.
So, but I don't know, the same way that Klaus was talking about the real cost of farming, okay, and not taking into account the cost of fertilizer, right? The same way when you think about buying something to eat, you only take into account what it's going to cost you in terms of coming out of your wallet, as opposed to the fact that it might kill you in 5 years, all right, from eating at McDonald's. So there's, in other words, the cost is larger than is immediately evident. And it's, for the most part, there isn't an argument left to justify smoking, though lots of people still do. Because my grandfather smoked for 75 years and he didn't die of lung cancer. I mean, we invent this shit. So it's back to the public awareness, the understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still hung up on this system's value system, because it's a paradigm level shift that has to take place, and it has to involve the entire chain, the entire social chain. And I would start by saying you know, how did we get here? How did the system end up with such a perversion of a system as we have it today? And then just start with, well, it was with good intentions. We thought we were just so smart, right? Because you put a little synthetic fertilizer on there and woof, everything just grows like crazy, and then it doesn't any. Then you realize that now when you do this big monocropping, now all the weeds are coming in, and insects, the predatory insects, so you need pesticides for that. And then the insects are getting immune against your pesticides, so you need to put something stronger out there. So the system just accelerates, right? And you get into this madness of having completely killed off your topsoil of all organic matter. And you are in free-floating chemical systems here that where you grow stuff, and then you try to genetically modify your crop, your seed, so that it can withstand all the toxins that you put on the soil, and still still produce corn that you can feed to people. So there's an insanity somehow that got into this system, and it's like you're waking up from a nightmare, and oh my God, you know, what have we done, kind of thing, you know, this sorcerer's apprentice kind of thing. And
Well,
so
that came from the scientific point of view, particularly after the 1920s, when everything was captured by a scientific method of discrete time, where nothing was interconnected, that, oh, this is the outcome for this harvest, this is the value that we're having. It lost the framework of a continual duration of multiple crop seasons, multiple interaction. It was just, it goes to the world of physics, where it became just shut up and calculate, rather than looking at a system that Gene's got here with arrows on it.
right. So we sort of know how we got there. What were the input lines that created this value system, and now comes a higher level consciousness that begins to understand the systemic implications of what this value system has done, and then where it needs to migrate to. You know, what are the influence factors now that are seeking to shift this value system into a new pathway, a new direction, and do it in a way where the system can move along. You know, where the entire system that we have seen can move along, where the awareness is being nurtured at community level. Community level businesses are starting to reform themselves. Disruptive innovators are entering the market and catering to this rising awareness of a new value, of a changing value system, forcing legacy systems to come along.
So in terms of the two loops that we have here between knowledge, public awareness, and systems value system, I still think are appropriate. That it's continuing to evolve the knowledge, which we use to continue to bring the public awareness along, and as the public awareness evolves, it's a basis for changing the systems value system.
I agree with that. The only but I have is that you cannot depend merely upon a formal education system or a system of education from experts. There has to be other ways of changing the value of people's awareness and systems that, and I don't saying that I know exactly how to do it, but you're not going to do this just by teaching everybody in classrooms about this.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And I would say that it comes from an evolution of the metaphors being used in that public awareness value system.
I can see that.
Yeah, okay, maybe the word education has brings the wrong connotation to it, because I wasn't thinking that it was only classroom education.
Okay. All right.
Hi, I think also it's not only a question of education. You need also like photo or that demonstrate. I remember once in Paris, in a newspaper in France, they had put a chicken, the lifetime of a normal chicken, how it goes, and a chicken raised on hormones. And you see that after 2 months, the hormone chicken is already an adult chicken, and the other one is still, let's say, 1/5 of the weight or the volume of the hormone chicken. And this was very striking, and everybody has spoken about it. So it's not only to give figures sometimes, but to give images. Images are more powerful, no? And they said, this is what you are eating. And it makes people think, okay?
Right, and the images are powerful. The difficulty is actually getting them in front of people. There are no shortage of movies and real movies that have been made on Netflix and other places, and videos on YouTube that demonstrate the negative aspects of feedlots and the factory farms for chickens. And I mean, if you watch a few of those, you'll never eat the stuff again. But people don't want to watch it. People don't want to know. A lot of people don't want to know. So
You don't have to convince everybody in the world. I mean, all the paradigm changes that we've gone through over the civilization's history didn't involve everybody being convinced, just enough people in order to make the changes. I suspect, I got to think about this for a while.
Yes, you don't have to convince everybody. You just
it's not, yeah, it's what is it, like 18-20% of the population has to be convinced to drive this forward. Yeah, innovators, adopters, yeah.
When you get a transformational change of awareness, there's a grieving process and it's irreversible. And so if there's a transformational change of awareness, like I would say Ben has, it's impossible for Walmart to work under their old business model, because no one's even looking at them in the way that they're trying to sell the product anymore. And that is what a paradigm shift is, a transformational change. You're not even looking at the world the same anymore.
I strongly suspect that even though they don't understand it, that Albert Einstein's theory of relativity has changed thinking in the modern world compared to what it was a century ago, more so than systems thinking has. I don't think systems thinking is a very prevalent concept within modern society, but I suspect that, again, even though they couldn't explain to you what it was, relativity has been.
Yeah, okay, but when you think this through for a moment, I mean, Einstein had he shifted the thinking of people who were very high up in the food chain.
Yes.
And who really then translated that into technologies ultimately, right? I mean, into applied science and so on.
Yes.
I think what's missing in system sciences is the application. I mean, I went to so many systems thinkers seminars. I mean, listening in, and You have the systems thinking network. I mean, they're engaged in so many things, but there is really a lack of focus in the systems thinking network, to engage with the natural world. I mean, when Einstein came out with his theories, it was profoundly embedded in the natural world, just at an extremely high level.
Yes.
So now with systems thinking, we are engaged in a practical level, but it's as profound a shift as Einstein produced in his way of thinking.
And I would argue that that is the heart of the success of Amazon and Twitter and all of those internet companies, etc., because they're operating on a systems model rather than a discrete model that moved science so far ahead. Science now knows they have to operate on a systems model rather than a discrete model that Einstein brought, because he could not merge the classical physics to the quantum physics. And that is what's going on. They're merging the two together through systems thinking, because the time is always continuous. So that is at the heart of flipping people's awareness that it is not a cost for the moment, it's a cost throughout time, and how you perceive the patterns that are right in front of you. That they're not snapshots, they're continuous. And that is what systems thinking is.
If we get into quantum mechanics, we're really going to be in trouble. Let's come back to systems.
Well, I'm not taking you to quantum. I'm saying it goes back to the power of the systems thinking.
What?
And though it has to be the understanding that the systems thinker develops has to be translated into a simplistic story, a simplified story that anyone can understand.
That's the power of the metaphors that George Lakoff knew 25 years ago.
Okay. So, I mean, of the hundreds of models that I've developed over my lifetime, I still consider the bird feeder problem to be the best one I've ever done, because everybody gets it.
Right.
Well, but then usually they don't get the right answer. But in terms of the realization of the interconnected nature of things and the appropriateness of continuing to think after you think you know the answer, it does that. And so what I continue to say about what the Heath brothers did in Moments, I contend that it's easy to understand what they said. Figuring out how to take this or take a cross section of this and put it together in a form where you can tell a story that others will connect with. It's just not easy to do. Otherwise, I'd have done this already. Or one of the rest of you would have done this already.
Gene, do you have a specific target in terms of communicating this?
My grandmother at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is fair. Yeah.
So, I could tell stories with loops, but I have to do it in such a way that when I get done, it
Maybe this story is too complex or complicated to do just with maps. Maybe we also need to have narrative as well. Or maybe we can't do it in one fell swoop. Maybe we need to make a presentation or some other serve the meal bite by bite and don't serve the meal all at once.
This is Aesop's fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, which unfolds very nicely as a story that talks about the boy being bored tending sheep, so he cries wolf, but doesn't understand the implications of crying wolf when there's no wolf. And the pictures have been helpful.
Oh, yeah.
In this.
I one time took your bird feeder. I mean, like I said, I've taken a lot of your maps and cloned them or forked them over. I took your bird feeder and I added your wife into the system.
Mm.
I wanted to see how having extra people in the system would affect it.
And what happened?
To tell you the truth, I can't remember. But I'll see if I can find it. I don't know. I'm sure I got it someplace, but it was when we were working together on that virtual systemic inquiry system.
What's your username?
Brian D. RPM.
Brian PR.
No, D. D as in dog.
DR.
PM.
PM.
Project manager. Right. That should be it. Oh. Yeah.
Well, one way to look at this, or as an idea, is looking at leverage points. And let's say that you had a community or a state or some situation, and you had all the power to look at the whole system, and you knew certain events were coming up, and you were given a half hour in any of those events to get across your idea. Then you would value that half hour, but it would be framed, whether it was a group of your grandmothers or a group of CEOs. You would frame the story and the metaphors and the diagrams to meet the need of what you thought that lever point could do for the whole system. And that, I think, is what, if someone really cared about their community or their system, and they would either have the money or write a grant so that they could take advantage of lever points and events that come up throughout the year. Even if you lived in Bend.
But at some point, those two perspectives have to come together.
Which two are those?
Between the CEO and the grandmothers.
Right, but it's always going to be a different audience.
Yeah.
Did I send this video to you people?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Oh, well, show it.
The first part was very short.
Although, Robert, there's an intersection between the CEO and the grandmother as well, where we could, yeah.
Right. Yeah, they both got grandma. At least the CEO should have a grandmother. Is that playing the sound? Sound isn't coming through for me.
What, you're not getting the sound?
Nope.
Was anybody getting the sound? No?
No.
I wonder why that is.
But I've got it elsewhere.
Okay. Well,
Let's see if it goes.
I put the link in the chat.
Well, summarize it, G.
Okay. Well, the CEO is trying to get people in the company to participate in the 401k program, where the company will go ahead and do a match up to a certain percentage, and people are just not paying attention. So he gets everybody together in the conference room, and he walks in with his bag and he dumps this whole pile of money on the table, and he said, "This is the money that went in my pocket at the end of the year because you didn't participate in the 401k program."
Yeah, you showed it.
Now, at the end of next year, do you want this pile of money in my pocket or in your pocket? He said that was it. Almost everybody went and signed up because he gave them a visual picture of something that was almost impossible to deny.
But they were also able to make an immediate one-time response and not change their actual, if they had to keep on doing that every day, or if they weren't able to do it immediately at that time, it may have not have worked out quite as well. That's kind of like a special situation.
And the good thing with that too is I think there's an immediate quantification of what is at stake.
So the way we have been starting to think about this in the sustainability groups that I'm hanging with is by focusing on soil, by saying that if soil health is compromised, then everything is compromised, and link it to the simplicity of soil driving the entire system. Does that make sense? Because you have to bring it down to one common denominator, and,
Right.
and that really is the soil.
We have to appropriate a quote from Godfather 1, where we give them a deal that they can't refuse.
Well, but to the point about the Heath brothers, if you could take two fields side by side and compress the time to show the result after a period of 5 years of the no-till approach and the normal approach side by side, and look at the production from those two fields side by side for a period of 5 years, it would become evident that the typical approach ruins the soil, and the no-till approach, regenerating the soil, is a much better approach. But you can't do that, you know. Taking the lungs out of people that died from lung cancer, from smoking, and displaying them to people would have quite an impact, but that's sort of frowned upon.
But you can link the soil health to water, you know, because soil that is organically enriched holds water like a sponge.
Right.
And whereas that soil deprived of of organic content becomes sand, basically, and washes out. So the United States has already lost 1/3 of its topsoil in the last 40 years. I mean, it's a worldwide phenomenon.
And one of the video that you sent, one of the videos that you sent last week, where the guy was talking about the extent to which his field now captures and retains water, where the one next door or his used to just end up running off,
right,
and running away, because now the soil is healthy and porous and it retains the water. So his crops actually do better under less rainfall.
Right, and lower irrigation. So that's just one thing. Then the other thing is, and I thought of that recently, species extinction is directly linked to soil health. Yeah, because life starts in the soil. There are more life forms in 1 teaspoon of soil than there is on top of the soil. Right? There are billions of bacteria and viruses and inside the soil, which in turn nurture worms and insects, which in turn nurture birds and small mammals, and so on. It goes up the food chain. So the extinction of life is directly linked to the destruction of topsoil. So we're coming, and I published this the other day, and there were like 40 copies. I mean, people are copy pasting it, because we just haven't made that link in our head. Now, even so, it's so obvious.
would say that that link then becomes hard, just like Gene said, well, let's show it over a 5-year period. The missing in our diagrams is the scale of time that those arrows represent. For example, in the Heath brother thing, well, sure, they're supposed to, they don't want to have him take home the money. They're supposed to take home the money, but the outcome is to reward you 40 years later when you retire. So there's so that maybe that collapse happened, but how do you show that in your graph? Because the value reward system is a 40-year period, just like what the one that example you just gave, Klaus. You know, so when you're making your plan to change system awareness, you almost have to map out different scales of time that you would be checking for how well your method of intervention is going. Because maybe that one interaction doesn't change everybody, but it changes a few. And then it changes it again, and then again and again, because you're continually trying to change the information over a scale of time.
I think it's widely understood that cotton, and no, we're not going to eat cotton. However, I wager that each of us is wearing some cotton. After all, it's the fabric of our lives. Cotton takes from the soil. Cotton does not give. So, Civil War, you know, we had an economy in the South based on cotton. After the Civil War, somehow or other, we put a system back in place, sharecropping, because we hadn't thought of another way to base the economy. I'm going to wager that a lot of commodity crops, like cocoa, sugar, are takers from the soil, not givers, if farmed in an industrial manner. And you point that out to people, this historical example, that's a way to tell a story to some people anyway.
It is. But you need to demonstrate examples. And I just pulled up this on YouTube, and I posted the links for it so that, you know, I mean, I have experimental evidence or actual evidence of till versus no till, and the differences in the results. And this one, soil pit discussion of 2 tillage systems that have been managed for over 25 years. I mean, that's so.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I have to go get ready for another meeting. So ponder this, and we'll
Come back this Thursday?
Yep, I'm available Thursday.
Okay.
I guess the question is, how do we take what we've understood to this point and tell a story? What story do we tell in a form that is easy for others to comprehend, to believe, to accept?
It's a big story.
Say again?
It's a big story.
Okay. Thank you all.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.